Hey, Adam here, and welcome back to the channel. I've been researching a number of strange disappearances in the United States and the UK, but I've run out of time before Christmas. So I've put together some of the most unusual cases that we've spoken about over the course of the last year. From a missing military man picking berries, people disappearing in national parks, to one of the smartest men out there disappearing without a trace. If you've heard of any beforehand, then the video is time-stamped so you can move through it however you want. Now with that being said, I know it's different this year, but I hope you have a nice Christmas, and I'll be back with the new research either just before the new year or early on afterwards. See you soon. I think it's best to start this by citing the Anniston Star paper, who, under the heading of "Reward Offered for Missing Vet," reported this on the 4th of August 1949. A $1,000 cash reward has been offered here for the discovery and return of a veteran Fort Knox soldier who has been missing since the 23rd of June. The missing man, a possible amnesia victim, is Sergeant Clarence D. Lunsway, a member of the Army since 1920. The soldier disappeared while berry picking in a wooded area near the fort. Sergeant Lunsway is described as 49, 5 feet 6 inches tall, 150 pounds, stocky build. He walks pigeon-toed and talks from the side of his mouth. Persons knowing the location of the missing soldier should contact Fort Knox military authorities. I'd never heard of a pigeon-toed walk, but it is listed as a genuine disability. Though from what I can gather, people with the condition mostly are able to live completely independently and without issues. I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page before we got into this. Now, while the first article we picked up there was reported on the 4th of August, the military stationed at Fort Knox had been scouring the area for Clarence since the 23rd of June when he failed to return from his berry picking session. I want to make this abundantly clear, by the way, the search for Clarence was like nothing we have ever seen before on this channel. It wasn't just massive, it was absolutely gigantic and long. The military were obviously looking out for their own on this one, and they pulled out all the stops and spared no expense. They had in excess of over 10,000 men in the area that he disappeared from, and they did discover his car seemingly abandoned near a blackberry patch. The Army authorities stated that apart from this, no trace of him had been found. It seems to me that the authorities may have been getting slightly desperate here when they then offered a $1,000 reward for finding Sergeant Clarence. So who knows how many thousands of people they had in the area after the reward was broadcast. I've had to come back and edit this in, but it actually wasn't the authorities who offered the reward for finding Clarence, but it was actually his wife who put out the reward. But the searches failed completely, and it wouldn't be for another 2 years until the next development was made. Around 2 years later, on the 22nd of May 1951, the Coshocton Tribune reported this under the heading of "Found Soldier's Body, Army Thinks He Passed of Natural Causes." Army officials indicated today that a veteran sergeant whose body was found yesterday after a 2-year search probably passed away of natural causes. A group of trainees ended the long hunt for Sergeant Clarence D. Lunsway when they discovered his skeleton about 5 miles from the heart of camp. Officers said that there was no indication that Lunsway had passed from anything other than natural causes. But the Army's Criminal Investigation Division was making an inquiry to determine the circumstances of his passing. Things are about to take a strange turn now, so let's get bizarre. The area where Sergeant Clarence was discovered was in a remote training field near Fort Knox as the trainees were performing a field maneuver. I would love to know where this area was in relation to his car and the place he was picking berries. The autopsy revealed that there was no sign of a struggle or any injuries of any kind, indicating that foul play didn't seem to be a factor here. This is when a Captain Joseph Schneider, a public information officer, revealed something that he found odd. He said that the area where the body was found had been searched by several thousand troops when he disappeared those 2 years ago. This isn't one or two people, nor 100, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of people who were in that exact location and never found him. Not to mention, they had search dogs in the area and planes flying overhead. It seems to me that Sergeant Lunsway may not have been in that area when it was initially searched. How in the world could he have been missed by thousands of searchers and well-trained search dog teams? How did the dogs fail to find a scent in the very area that he was supposed to be? Am I missing something here, or is that not just outright weird? Captain Schneider seemed to think it was odd. It's not as if this search was abruptly ended either. He disappeared on the 23rd of June and they still had thousands of boots on the ground searching in late August. And probably beyond that too. What in the world happened to Sergeant Lunsway that day and where did he go? And what do we mean by he probably passed away due to natural causes? It seems completely unreasonable to me that this man could have evaded over 10,000 searchers, search dog teams and planes flying overhead for 2 months, at the least. Unfortunately, the paper trail goes cold after this and there doesn't seem to be much of a follow-up. What do you make of this one? Now, at this stage, I wanted to have a change of pace and I actually found an interesting segment in the Syracuse Herald back in 1931. Unfortunately, specific names of the people involved are not mentioned in this instance, but I wanted to include this here because one of the lieutenants working these cases seemed to want to draw a connection between the two as he felt something was off about them. Here's what was reported by the Syracuse Herald on the 1st of November 1931. There's a strange coincidence in the case Lieutenant Hughes encountered when he found a missing girl berry picker asleep in one field and an elderly man berry picker gone to his eternal rest in another field nearby. Lieutenant Hughes, who operates an airplane with his state troopers, reported the following strange case about a little girl and an elderly man. Just recently, there came a report over the teletype that a 50-year-old man who was last seen going into the huckleberry field near Utica had not returned home. Lieutenant Hughes piloted his plane over the huckleberry fields and discovered no clue. 3 days passed and the usual numbers of missing persons cases flashed through stations, but the 50-year-old man remained dropped from this earth. State police had hunted without avail. Then came a report that a 15-year-old girl last seen going into the same huckleberry field near Utica had vanished from sight. Here's a clue, determined the state troopers. Lieutenant Hughes piloted his plane over the 6 square miles of massed bushes. He flew low and peered into the wild brush. A rainy spell had held the valley in a dark vice and the case only deepened. Suddenly at nightfall, the flying lieutenant perceived a sleeping form on the damp earth. He had difficulty in landing on the rough territory. Hurriedly, he rushed over to the girl and discovered her to be the missing berry picker. He questioned her rapidly about the elderly man, if she had seen him and what she was doing in the field. Strangely, she replied that the last thing that she remembers was picking berries and then she thinks she had fallen asleep. 2 days later, a couple of lads walking through the woods a few miles from the huckleberry bushes stumbled across the body of the 50-year-old man. It doesn't appear that the cause of the man's passing was ever determined, and Lieutenant Hughes seemed to have some sort of gut feeling that the two incidents were related somehow. It looks like while he wasn't actually able to connect the two cases, he was absolutely certain that they were linked in some way. I can't say that I've ever just had the urge to sleep in a field after hiking, but perhaps it was a different time back then. I can certainly see why, at least to some degree, why Lieutenant Hughes was caught on this one. That's all of the information unfortunately, and it's a shame that Lieutenant Hughes didn't go into more detail about the potential link, but I thought that it was odd and worth sharing. Firstly, I just wanted to say that this disappearance was bizarre and unusually difficult to research because so much of the information on this case just simply doesn't exist anymore. Most of the press reports on this case have since been deleted, so I've had to piece together what I can. I think it's important that we don't let incidents like these just disappear and be forgotten. Now, on the 12th of January 2014, 18-year-old Dylan Parker was attending a party with friends on 2 Mile Road in the small town known as Osborne, located in Idaho. It's not clear for how long Dylan was present at the party, but after some time, Dylan had decided that he was finished and made the decision to go home. Dylan's mother had agreed to pick him up once he was done. Before getting his mother to pick him up, Dylan had first walked to a Shell gas station around a mile away from the party. It was obviously sometime in the evening or night, but I've got to say that the press, or at least the articles that are still present, didn't do such a great job here. There's barely any information within them, and specific times are simply not mentioned. What we can be certain of though is that Dylan had contacted his mother before leaving the party and asked her to meet him at the 76 gas station a mile away. Dylan's mother arrived at the gas station a short time afterwards, but Dylan was not there and there was no sign of him. According to Dylan's family, he was in a great mood that day and was looking forward to meeting his friends and attending the party. As Dylan's mother was driving to the gas station, she noted that there was clean, uninterrupted snow all around the station, indicating that Dylan had never made it to the site. Upon realising that Dylan wasn't coming, she drove past the house he had been in, and in the opposite direction looking for her son. It's not clear for how long she was driving in the area, but she said that she never came across any footprints or tyre tracks other than the ones that she was creating. It's not clear when the police were notified, but I imagine it was the same night given the situation. The authorities were able to deduce that Dylan had wandered away from the gas station. His mother stated, "Towards the gas station, you can see the lights of Osborne. When you look the other way, it's just darkness." He knew which way he was going. He grew up here, and as any boy, they're in the mountains. He's used to the mountains. According to various press outlets, the search started for Dylan on the day after his disappearance, though specifics are not mentioned. At this point, the search had gone on for 8 days when his body was found on the 21st of January 2014. Now, we're going to have to get bizarre at this point. Dylan, for some reason, had entered the woods and had begun ascending up the mountain. It's not clear how far he made it up, but when searchers located Dylan's body, they first realised that his pants and shoes were missing, and noted that his injuries were consistent with someone stumbling through the woods. However, this is when one of the investigators made an astute observation. Not only were Dylan's socks completely clean, he had also sustained no injuries to his feet whatsoever, no scratches or anything of that nature. The cause of Dylan's passing was attributed to hypothermia, which is fairly difficult to argue against given the evidence present and the fact that he was frozen. However, that is not the whole story here, which should be overwhelmingly obvious to anyone. How in the world could Dylan have traversed the woods uphill without any boots on, and his socks have been completely clean? Not to mention that he had sustained no injuries to his feet, while the rest of his body had sustained scratches and the types of injuries you'd expect to see from someone wandering aimlessly in the woods. That needs to be explained, because I'm sorry Chief, but that is not consistent with someone walking in the woods. In fact, this piece of information clearly indicates that Dylan was not walking, and seems to be far more consistent with the idea of being carried. Here's a brief quote from Dylan's mother. "I don't deny that my son passed away due to hypothermia. What I don't understand is how did he get up there? There were no footprints that day. No tyre tracks, there was nothing. How did he get up there?" During the brief phone call with Dylan, she said that the sound of his voice was chilling, as though it was raised and panicky. Dylan told her to meet him at the gas station and then walked the opposite direction. Why? If that was completely purposeful, why would he have rang her at all? Across the channel, in many videos now, this type of odd behaviour has cropped up a number of times before a person has disappeared. I will include a disappearance that I've covered previously where this was the case towards the end of the video, but if you want to see more incidents where this has been the case, then I would invite you to watch the video I made on the Manchester Canal disappearances. The Deputy Coroner, Dave Roos, also made some odd comments in regards to Dylan. Here's what he had to say. There were no injuries to his feet, and this boy was walking in the woods. I know it's been argued away that a lot of the scratches on his body were because he was staggering around the brush and trees, yet the bottom of his socks were completely clean and there were no injuries to his feet. Yes, he did freeze and was under the influence, I won't dispute any of that. But I don't believe that this boy wandered up all on his own, laid down and passed away. Honestly, to me at least, that seems fairly self-evident given the evidence present. The state of his socks and feet does not insinuate that he walked up there on foot. I absolutely cannot see how that is the case here. However, here's the statement from the Idaho authorities. The Parker case is closed. Our detectives looked at many different angles and foul play is not suspected. Of course, if a citizen has information that would indicate foul play and they have not talked previously to law enforcement, they can call the agencies that originated the cases. There were other incidents in the area that are attributed to this next part, but I can't share them on YouTube because of the nature. However, you can read about them on my Patreon for free, so I'll leave the link to that in the description below. Some time after Dylan's disappearance, and others that had also occurred, Dave's career as a deputy coroner was abruptly ended. Dave said, 3 weeks later, I came in and I was terminated. They told me that they let me go because they were hiring a licensed person. Then they hired an MRT, which is what I was. I lost my job because I refused to be quiet. Specific to Dylan, it was obvious that Dave felt that he did not walk uphill in the woods alone, and let's be honest, the evidence does suggest that. After the official investigation ended, Dylan's mother hired a private investigator and pleaded with the FBI to get involved, though I can't find any information to suggest that they became involved. Okay, so let's summarise here. On the 12th of January, Dylan attended the party. He called his mum to pick him up from the gas station. His mum says that his voice is chilling, raised and maybe panicky. His mum arrives and Dylan is not at the gas station. His mum then begins to search the area in her car and notes that there were no footprints or tyre tracks in the snow other than her own. Police are now involved on the 13th and the search is on. 8 days later on the 21st, they find his body. Dylan was found without shoes and trousers. Dylan's body had scratches and injuries consistent with walking around in the woods. But his socks were completely clean and his feet had sustained no injuries or scratches. There were no footprints anywhere around the body either, but it had been 8 days, so his or others could have been hidden by snowfall. The police conclude that this was accidental and no foul play. Let's be clear, the things highlighted show the inconsistencies here. Can anyone realistically explain how Dylan could have been wandering around in the woods in his socks, getting scratches all over the place except for his feet, whilst his socks also remained clean? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever and seems to suggest that he could have been carried. I will note that not at any stage did anyone say anything about a struggle, so we have to assume that there was no evidence to indicate that, which honestly just makes this even stranger. When Dylan called his mum, his voice was chilling and sounded raised and perhaps panicky. Why? What caused that? His mum drove past the house in question and said that the snow was clean, indicating that it didn't appear that anyone had walked or drove in the area for a while. How is that possible? I've had to come back and edit this in, but I found a thread of people talking about this incident. A user by the name of Peliquin did a bit of research in regards to the weather at the time. This is what he had to say. Looking at the old weather reports on the day of Dylan's disappearance, there was 1.5 inches of snow that had fallen that day. The week before, the area had gotten some significant snow. Any tracks he made would have been reasonably deep. The next day, there was less than 1/3 of an inch, but that wouldn't have filled them in very effectively at all. There was no snow between the 12th of January and the day he was found. Furthermore, the weather stayed reasonably cold while he was missing, so his tracks should have still been visible during the searches. There were snow melting temperatures very briefly, but they happened a week after he vanished, meaning that the searchers should have seen his tracks right away when they'd looked for him earlier. Also, brief snow melting temperatures might not have obscured his tracks all that much anyway. In fact, probably didn't, since the area in which he was found is heavily forested, meaning the snow would have been in the shade, sheltering the tracks. The trees should also have protected the tracks from wind. Even if some snow had gotten through to obscure the tracks, there still should have been some tracks to note. Peliquin actually makes some good points there, and it was said that there were no footprints near the body leading up to or away from. Unless the weather reports were mistaken, that is very unusual that there were no footprints in the area no matter the position you take. Whether he did walk up there by himself or was taken up there by a third party, it seems reasonable that there should have been some tracks present. So that begs the question, how did Dylan get to his final position, and why were there no tracks in the area indicating how he got there? You'll have to share your thoughts on this one, because I feel like I'm going crazy reading this. Have I missed something obvious, or was this just outright weird? At this point, let's travel to Tasmania, an island state of Australia. This is where the retired high school teacher Bruce Fairfax, 66 years old, went missing on the 14th of October 2017. Bruce was said to be an adventurous, highly intelligent individual that loved hiking and sightseeing. Bruce adored his dog, Tessa, which was presumably one of the reasons he enjoyed hiking so much, because he was able to do it with her. Bruce, Tessa and his wife Louise planned to hike in the southern part of the country southwest of Dover on the Duck Hole Lake Trail. Louise was in better shape than Bruce, though that was mostly due to Bruce suffering from Parkinson's disease, which he required daily medication for. Louise had a love of photography and walked ahead of Bruce and Tessa to take some pictures of a nearby waterfall. A distance was not specified, but from what I can gather, didn't seem to be very far away, and nearby was a picnic area that the pair were supposed to meet at. Parks Tasmania lists the 2.5-mile track as an easy stroll through a forest of stringy barks and rainforest, suitable for all age groups. From what I can gather, the trail isn't too taxing on the body and is clearly marked, or rather, it is unlikely that someone would lose the trail. Louise, who was taking pictures of the waterfall, sounded the alarm when Tessa caught up to her, alone. Louise waited for a moment, but grew nervous and went to check on Bruce, but there was no sign of him. When Bruce was last seen, she said that he was enjoying himself, was eating an apple and gave her a cheeky smile as she was heading off towards the waterfall. When Louise failed to find Bruce, she quickly called the authorities, who responded to the disappearance quickly. 60 people, including search and rescue personnel, police and volunteers were all over that trail. When the search produced no results, a helicopter was deployed over the area, fitted with thermal imaging technology, alongside dog teams who were introduced into the forest. The searchers were astounded at Bruce's disappearance because outside the trail, walking is basically not possible. Search coordinator and senior constable Chris Williams had this to say: "Bruce is a member of a bushwalking club and fellow members from the Launceston have travelled down to join the search." Duck Hole Lake is a flooded sinkhole listed among Tasmania's 60 great short walks. The bushland around the trail is dense and coarse. You get off the track and it's the type of terrain that you can't walk through. If you want to get through it, you get on your hands and knees and push through it. How Bruce managed to do that is not clear given his age and ailments. It seems that searchers were of the belief that he should have been found. Williams continued, "I'm optimistic about finding him, but as time goes on, it becomes more concerning. Why we haven't found him so far, we're looking into all areas that he should be, but we haven't come across him." Interestingly, searchers came across a partially eaten apple and a banana core and sent them for forensic testing to see if they belonged to Bruce. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the results of the test. Days had passed and no signs of Bruce had surfaced at any point, and now people were becoming concerned because the longer Bruce had gone without his medication, the less clear he would be able to think. Though this doesn't explain Bruce's initial disappearance, but this was now becoming a major concern. Williams said that they fully expected to find him off the track, but they don't believe that he will acknowledge them. He said hopefully the search dogs pick up his scent and may lead us to a new area to search. This hope was placed in the dogs for good reason. On this channel, we cover these types of incidents a lot, and I'm constantly picking out the cases where the dogs never find a scent at any point. But on average, the search dogs are tremendously helpful in finding the missing. For some time now, I've been trying to find a study on search dog effectiveness, and I finally found one by Dr. Greatbatch et al. There is a widespread and long-standing use of dogs in land search and rescue operations, and their effectiveness is well accepted within the SAR community. However, very little published research exists that quantifies the effectiveness with a realistic search and rescue environment. In this study, they took 10 dog and handler pairs and placed things randomly in various environments and then calculated the success rate of the find. They said that the dogs were 76.4% successful overall with an effectiveness of 62.9%. I'm not actually sure how they're calculating the effectiveness score here because I don't have the time to go through the study, but I will refer to this study in more detail in another video, perhaps specifically focusing on cases where dogs were introduced. Back onto Bruce, Williams vowed that the search would endure until they had a result. However, 3 days later, still not a single trace of Bruce was found, which was just completely bizarre and threw everyone off. Because absolutely nothing was surfacing, the search operations were called off, with plans for small-scale, specialist operations to continue over the course of a week. In the end, there were far more people in the bushlands than just the 60. It's not clear how many, but the authorities stated, "We would just like to thank the overwhelming number of volunteers who have come forward to help over the last 5 days. They have done a fantastic job in searching and researching the area, which also contains some impenetrable terrain." Louise said, "I never saw him again, and we have no idea what happened. Police searched every track and road in the area by car and foot. We searched from the sky using a helicopter, and that kept going until about 10:30 PM. The helicopter had thermal imaging technology and stunningly strong lights, but nothing was found. I explored off track in all the places where perhaps someone could go off to the side, but to no avail." Ultimately, all involved were left baffled at Bruce's disappearance, presumably with a sense of bewilderment at the fact that the search in its entirety had failed to produce any clues. Unfortunately, the results of the analysis of the apple and banana were not reported by the press, so it's unclear if they were Bruce's or not. In the end, it's not clear what happened here. Did Bruce become confused and then walk off the trail and somehow forced himself through the dense terrain described by Chris Williams? Animal predation didn't seem to have occurred here, as that is normally quite obvious to the searchers. This is one of those disappearances where I don't really know where to go with it. I feel that Bruce really should have been found in this situation, and if he was close, then the dog should have had some success. What do you make of this one? The country of France is the second largest in Europe, and generally speaking, it is difficult to report on cases from other countries whose primary language is not English. Obviously, this is because the reporting is done in the native tongue, introducing a language barrier. However, when a British national goes missing abroad in these countries, we often get reports too, as was the case when David Wood went missing in the French Alps. David was 61 years old at the time and was on holiday with his partner Valerie Armstrong in the Tinny Valley region of the Alps. David was a highly intelligent individual who worked as a computer engineer and was a father of 2. On the 2nd of August 2016, David had planned a solo hike in the morning from his location at the village of Marie to a small town almost 4 miles away. I want to make it clear at this point that David knew this area well, and the couple had stayed in the area for 6 weeks every summer since 2010. While David was generally in good health, he did suffer from mild hypertension, but in preparation for his holiday, he had gone on hikes every day to build up his fitness. This planned hike, apparently, is a common one that isn't too demanding on the body and offers some great sights, which presumably explains its popularity. The route runs through a valley next to a nearby river and forest. It's at this stage that things start to take a strange turn. An hour had passed since David took off and Valerie called his mobile phone to see how he was getting on. He said that he was enjoying himself and that everything was okay and that he was on his way back and was approximately 30 minutes away. After this time had lapsed, David still hadn't returned, so Valerie called him again. David said that he was tired and had sat down to take a rest, but still maintained that he was about 30 minutes away. This was the last time that anyone would ever hear from David, and every call thereafter went unanswered. Valerie stated he was supposed to be back by 2:30 PM in the afternoon since he had a conference call booked. He had to be back. It is completely odd that he went so far. After David failed to return and was no longer answering the phone, Valerie reported him as missing to the local authorities. The police arrived in good time, and with them came helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. David was seen on the path that he was hiking by a couple on a motorbike. He stopped them and asked them for directions to Marie. The couple said that he'd been hiking in the wrong direction, so they pointed him the correct way. He seemed so confused, the couple said. David's son, Danny, who was 32 at the time, quickly flew out to the area with his brother and stated, if he fell on the path or just off the path, he would have been found. The forest nearby is very dense, and although he's quite an inquisitive person, he would not put himself in any unnecessary risk. So walking deep into it seems highly unlikely, especially as he knew that he had to be back home soon. These areas have also been heavily searched. One theory was that he may have fallen into the river, but authorities stated that it is unlikely that the rivers would have carried him away, as it hadn't rained in over a week and the current wasn't strong enough. After around 3 weeks of searching, no trace of David was ever found. The dogs never picked up his scent, those on foot never found any clues to indicate where he might have gone, and the helicopters never made any potential identifications either. David seemed to have vanished without leaving a trace behind. One theory speculated that because David acquired ear infections rather easily, he may have gained a bad case of that, leading to confusion and dizziness. Another stated that the sun might have affected him negatively, or perhaps that he'd fallen and had a concussion. Regardless, whatever happened here left no trace or indication of what it might have been. It's not clear what happened to David, but nothing has ever surfaced. To finish, here is one last incident where unfortunately less information was made available, but nevertheless, the details we do have are simply bizarre. Roger Bainbridge, who was 67 years old at the time, disappeared whilst on a holiday to Greece while visiting his sister, Maggie. Specifically, Roger had travelled to the island of Paxos and from there went on a solo day trip to Antipaxos, which requires a ride on a ferry to reach the destination. This was on the 26th of September 2013, and it was at some point during this hike that Roger disappeared without a trace. The island is tiny, with an area of 2 square miles, but even so, Roger could not be located. Roger could definitely be placed on the island, as others in the area had seen him and interacted with him. He had a conversation with some of the hikers who walked with him for a short distance. Also, it's not like Roger had never hiked before. He had a lot of experience hiking and was a fellow hiker in the Lake District back in England. The police were notified and joined the locals who were already searching the island. A helicopter with thermal imaging equipment also joined the search, but again, no sign of Roger was found. Roger's son, Ian Bainbridge, said this: "Time is of the essence, we just need to know what's going on. Not knowing anything is scary, we are trying to keep as calm as possible. None of the most likely explanations add up. If he had gone swimming and got into trouble, then some of his belongings would have been found on the beach. It's just bizarre." A year later, Roger had still not been found, and Ian said, "We're no further forward really, it's totally bizarre. We are just totally confused and amazed that we've not heard anything in a whole year. There's been nothing found, no body, no trace of Dad, no credible theory really. We're still left with a lot of questions which realistically in this life we may never get any answers to." It's worth mentioning that officers from the UK also made the trip to Greece to see if they could assist in the ongoing case, but they too failed. This case was described as an absolute mystery and even 7 years later remains unexplained. Andrew Brunelli, a 43-year-old experienced hiker, disappeared in the Grand Canyon National Park in early September of 2009. Andrew was a highly intelligent individual born upstate New York on the 30th of June 1966. Andrew would later attend the North Carolina State University in Raleigh and achieved a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science. After finishing, Andrew chose to join the US Navy and served aboard the USS Fairfax. Andrew was well thought of among his peers who all spoke very highly of him and praised his outdoor abilities along with being a skilled fisherman. Early September of 2009 was not Andrew's first visit to the park. In fact, it was stated that hiking in the Grand Canyon was one of his favourite activities and something he did a lot of, and as a result was very familiar with the area. It's not entirely clear what was different this time and why it had gone awry. On the 5th of September, the Coconini County Sheriff's Office received a call from the Andrews family stating that he had planned a solo hike in the Grand Canyon but that they hadn't heard back from him since his arrival at the park. Specifically, the last time Andrew was seen was at 5 AM on the morning of the 31st of August by hotel staff. The Sheriff's Office got in touch with the park rangers who set up and organised the search and rescue efforts. According to NAStoday.com, search and rescue personnel defined their search zone based on the location of Mr. Brunelli's rental car, his past history of short to medium day hikes in the area, and the lack of a backcountry permit indicating a longer itinerary. By Wednesday morning, all of the high probability areas within the initial search zone had been searched and in many cases researched by ground crews, dog teams and technical ropes/canyoneering teams. It's not completely clear how many people were involved in the search, but it seems that the search was extensive and included helicopters fitted with thermal imaging technology. The search radius was scoured, but unfortunately they couldn't find a single trace of him. This search would continue for 4 days until the discovery of Andrew's body was made. On the 9th, it's not completely clear why, though presumably because of continuous failed searches, the decision was made to expand the search zone. This was despite an air of skepticism that Andrew had managed to hike outside of the original zone. According to NPS.gov, with fewer ground personnel to support, the park helicopters was able to engage in aerial search operations beyond the original search zone. Helicopter crew members spotted the body in a drainage north of the Tonto Trail and approximately 2 miles east of the South Khabib Trail in the vicinity of Patty Boot. The body was retrieved by helicopter via long-line operation and taken to the South Rim, where it will be transferred to the Coconini County Medical Examiner. It's not completely clear why Andrew veered off from the trail. From what I can gather, the trail is well marked and doesn't seem to be easily mistakable. This also doesn't seem to be common behaviour from Andrew, nor is it understood how he entered the drainage. Interestingly, a cause of passing was never released, nor is it clear that one was established. All sources indicate that Andrew's body was sent to a medical examiner for autopsy, but that is where the paper trail ends. The fact that Andrew's body was sent to a medical examiner suggests that the cause of passing may not have been completely obvious. The condition of the body was not discussed either, meaning that it is unlikely that he had simply fallen because that information is normally disclosed and apparent. Ultimately, it's not clear what happened to Andrew that day, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unexplained. Now, let's explore another. On the 12th of July 1966, 8-year-old Dennis Eugene Johnson disappeared in Yellowstone National Park. The Johnson family consisted of the parents, their 3 daughters, and Dennis, who had planned what was supposed to be a relaxing trip to the park. However, this journey would end up being a nightmare for the family. The family themselves often made trips and spent time in the outdoors and loved being with one another. All sources indicate that all of the children had been taught basic survival skills, and Dennis had prior wilderness experience whilst tagging along on hunting trips. On the day in question, the family had driven from Canyon Junction to the northeast, where they had arranged to have a picnic together. It's not completely clear what had happened at this point. Some sources indicate that Dennis and one of his sisters were playing nearby, while others indicate that Mary, the sister in question, wandered off. But from what I can gather, it appears that Dennis and Mary wandered off from the picnic area up a nearby hill. Sources don't seem to give a specific time frame here, but it appears that shortly after the pair wandered up the hill, Dennis would return alone. It seems to me that much time can't have passed, as the parents were not concerned about their departure together. However, upon Dennis's return, he was asked where Mary had gone to, which he replied that he didn't know. According to the Oakland Tribune, the Chief Park Ranger's office reported that a younger sister wandered off when the Johnson family stopped at a picnic area along the highway 1/4 mile north of Canyon Junction, Tuesday afternoon. The father and Dennis went separate directions to look for the girl. The father found the missing girl, but Dennis vanished. Specifically, it was another camper who had found Mary and had taken her to a nearby ranger station and was then brought back to the family. At this point, the father travelled in the direction of Dennis to tell him that all was well, however, he couldn't locate his son. Nervous now, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson began to search the area in an effort to retrieve their son. This search was unsuccessful, and the family appealed to other hikers and campers nearby who assisted in the search until 4 p.m. No trace of Dennis could be found, and the National Park Service were made aware of the situation. It's important to note that Dennis went missing at around an 8,000 foot elevation, and that the mountainous area is rugged, and it was suspected that Dennis really shouldn't have been able to get very far. The Corpus Christi Times gave us an indication of the search effort with their report on the 15th of July 1966, 3 days after the initial disappearance. Yellowstone National Park. No trace was found yesterday by around 50 men in a ground and air search for an 8-year-old California boy missing since Tuesday. Rangers said the search would resume Friday. Night temperatures in the park have been down to about 44 degrees. Dennis Johnson, son of Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, became separated from his family while hunting for his sister. The girl was found, but in the meantime, Dennis had vanished. The search only intensified from there, and soon over 100 employees of the National Park Service were deployed to find Dennis. Helicopters, specialist search dog teams, and professional trackers were all brought in to find him. Reports indicate that the searchers, and especially the trackers, were left baffled because they were completely expecting to find his footprints, but none were located anywhere in the area. 8 days into the search, the Lovington Daily Leader reported this. Experienced park rangers were to retrace their routes today in an attempt to find a young boy 8 days ago in the Yellowstone area. We are still hopeful, said a ranger, but so far there have been no definitive trace of the 8-year-old. As many as 125 men have gone over the area, walking shoulder to shoulder through the forest areas and climbing along the rim of the Grand Canyon. Late Tuesday, the boy's father, 2 uncles, and his grandfather were continuing their own search for the missing lad. After 2 more days of searching, hope seemed to drain from the situation. The Logan Herald-Journal reported this. The search was scheduled to continue today in Yellowstone National Park, where Dennis has been missing for 10 days. Park officials held little hope that they would find the 60-pound 8-year-old safe. No trace of the youth has been found by hundreds of searchers who have blanketed a 100 square mile area since the boy was reported missing. During the time, the searchers were perplexed because nothing at all was turning up. The helicopters never made any sightings of Dennis or where he could have been, and the search dogs never picked up his scent at any point during the search, which many claimed to be unusual. Naturally, the possibility of Dennis being taken came up around a week into the search, which is roughly the time of FBI involvement into the case. The extent of their involvement is unknown, and it's not clear if they had any theories of their own. One searcher made the comment, "It was almost as if Dennis had been snatched from the face of the earth." The official search lasted for 2 weeks, but after no evidence or clues presented itself, the search was called off. Dennis's family, however, continued their own unofficial search, but they never found Dennis or any indication of where he might have gone. This trip was a disaster from the get-go. First, Dennis and Mary had somehow gotten separated before Mary went missing. Thankfully, she was then successfully located some distance away from the picnic area. Meanwhile, Dennis goes missing without leaving a footprint or even a trace behind as to where he might have gone. This was a very troubling disappearance, and there are no real answers, and in fact, we're left with almost every question unanswered. Why couldn't professional trackers locate anything to indicate where he might have gone? No footprints were in the area. The dogs never found his scent. Why? Does this indicate that he wasn't even there anymore? The general feeling was that Dennis should surely have been found, but that was obviously not the case. What happened to Dennis Johnson, and where did he go? In 2012, 31-year-old Thomas Seibold, who lived in Three Rivers in Wisconsin, had planned a trip to Alaska. He had taken 6 months worth of leave from his workplace and set off in June of that year. Thomas had years upon years of survivalist training under his belt, and he enjoyed being in the backcountry hiking, camping, and generally spending a good amount of time out there. Thomas was originally from Germany and had spent the prior 6 years from 2007 both teaching and training at the Three Rivers Drum Outdoor School. This is a survivalist school specialising in Native American values and techniques ranging from shelter construction to hunting and gathering. Teachers and the founder of the school himself, Tamarack Song, described Thomas as a highly experienced, competent individual and a natural in the wilderness. He described him as a wandering spirit. The Daily Sitka Sentinel, who were covering this incident as it was unfolding, gave more information about Thomas's plans. They stated, Thomas had planned to stay in the northwest Alaska backcountry through October and had booked a flight home to Wisconsin, but he never made it to that flight. Thomas first made the trip to an Alaska Native fish camp in southeast Alaska before heading north. Tamarack said Thomas travelled to the northwest Alaska village of Ambler in September, hiking to a cabin about 30 miles to the north up the Ambler River. This area is inside the gates of the Arctic National Park. NationalGeographic.com describes the area as such. Climb practically any ridge in the heart of the park and you'll see a dozen glacial cirques side by side. Serrated mountains that scythe the sky, and storms that snap out of the dark, brooding clouds. 6 national wild and scenic rivers, Alatna, John, Kabuk, Noatak, North Fork Koyuk, and Tineguk. The park lies entirely above the Arctic Circle, straddling the Brooks Range, one of the world's northernmost mountain chains. Thomas had some assistance organising this trip with the help of some members of the school, and they put him in touch with a woman who owned a cabin near the Ambler River. This is where Thomas was heading to meet up with her and her son of 13 years who also lived with her. The Ambler River, and specifically the cabin, is located in Brooks Range, which is located right on the border of the gates of the Arctic National Park. It's important to note that Thomas arrived at the woman's cabin home in June, and 3 months later, on the 27th of September, is the last time he was seen, though not when he went missing. The Daily Sitka Sentinel reported that Thomas, the woman, and the boy canoed down the river to the woman's fish camp sometime in September. Thomas parted ways with the woman and her son on the 27th of September and said that he planned to head back to the cabin. Now, to reach the cabin on foot, from my understanding, means travelling through the gates of the Arctic National Park. Thomas wanted to head back to the cabin because he had planned to hike out 25 miles to Kobuk in October and was supposed to contact someone by the 11th of November. The woman and her child, however, had planned to remain at the fish camp and didn't plan to return for some time. When Thomas failed to check in with the person he was supposed to contact, said person reported him missing to the authorities. Thomas was supposed to fly back to Wisconsin on the 15th of November, which of course did not happen. It's worth mentioning that Thomas was not new to this type of land and understood the dangers well. As previously mentioned, he was highly trained and experienced with spending time in extreme areas. For instance, he had spent time camping alone in -32°C or -25°F in harsh northern winter conditions in Norway. The Alaskan authorities deployed aircraft to search from above, but said that no sign of Thomas ever turned up. Authorities did make it clear, however, that they fully expected to find Thomas in good time. While they didn't find Thomas or any sign of him, the pilots did locate the cabin where they landed shortly thereafter. Inside the cabin and around it were no clues to indicate that he was nearby, and it was stated that it didn't look like he'd been there for weeks. While bleak, this did mean that Thomas did in fact make it back to the cabin and was able to complete his journey on the 27th of September. During this time, the weather had taken a turn for the worse and high winds in the region started to hinder the search efforts. According to thomasseibaldsearch.blogspot.com, in a search of the cabin, Alaska State Troopers found Thomas's diary. The last entry was October the 7th, where he stated that he was preparing to go on a several-day exploration. The troopers found no evidence of him being at the cabin after that approximate date. From that information, we can probably come to the conclusion that it was during this several-day exploration is where he went missing. Unfortunately, the diary entry was not released, so it's unclear if Thomas specifically mentioned where he was going. However, we do know that he had plans to hike to Kobuk, so perhaps that was a possibility. On the 27th of November, the Daily Sitka Sentinel reported this: "Whatever happened to Thomas Seibold next is a mystery. We believe things may have gone awry for him," said Sergeant Duane Stone, supervisor for the trooper post in Kotzebue. He wrote about his plans to hike out for further exploration, and that is where the letters ended. Other writings found at the cabin contain vague hints of possible plans. A description of hiking and camping at higher elevations and notes on preparing wood at the cabin for upcoming weather. However, despite these clues, searchers could still not figure out where he'd gone. By the time the search concluded, searchers had scanned over 3,500 square mile area of mountains, canyons and river drainages. One pilot stated that he had witnessed a circle marking on gravel around 8 miles north of the Ambler River. Thomas's colleagues said that the circle has such a strong meaning to Thomas that we think there's a high likelihood that he etched the sign. One theory speculated that he knew that he was in trouble and perhaps was denoting a place to drop provisions. Another theory stated that the etching was of a spiritual significance, though it is important to note that a search of the area found no indication of Thomas's presence. Searchers said that they have seen animal tracks but no human tracks anywhere in the area. It's also important to note that the circle, despite its significance to Thomas, may have been completely unrelated to him. Sergeant Stone said that the circle is the only sign of a human traveller in the area, and it was expected that they would find human footprints nearby, or at least a sign of human activity, but that wasn't the case. thomasseibaldsearch.blogspot.com posted this on the 14th of December 2012. The National Park authorities have stopped searching for Thomas. Just like the Alaska State Troopers, they also say that they would continue the search if it was their loved one who was missing. It seems at this point, loved ones, family members, friends and colleagues continued their own independent search and hired pilots to fly over the area. To conclude, all search efforts failed and no sign of Thomas has ever been found. Searchers could find no evidence of animal predation or a struggle, no belongings or a campsite were ever found. Search dogs never picked up a scent, and the aerial searches also provided no results other than the etched circle. It's unclear where Thomas went or what took place. Now at this point, we're going to finish with a disappearance that took place on the Indian border with China. Specifically, this incident occurred on Mount Nun, located in the Kashmir Himalayas. To be quite honest with you, I wasn't sure if I should even talk about this one, because the more I read about it, the more confusing the reports become, and ultimately, I've absolutely no idea what happened, but let's have a look. Thomas A. Mutch was an American geologist and planetary scientist. He was a professor at Brown University in Rhode Island, and he was in that position from 1960 up until his disappearance in 1980. Thomas had actually led a very interesting and adventurous life, from being an active member of mountaineering clubs, followed by a stint in the South Korean military as an artillery officer. After this, he came back to the States where he acquired his PhD in geology. More specifically though, Thomas disappeared on the 6th of October 1980 while descending from Mount Nun. According to AmericanAlpineClub.org, Thomas passed away on October 6, 1980 at the age of 49 while descending from the summit of Mount Nun in northern India, following a bivouac above 21,000 feet with two former students on an expedition which he initiated and led. He was last seen on the morning of the 6th on a precarious ledge at the bivouac site above the steep northwest face of the mountain, after a fall the previous day and the loss of a crampon needed to continue the descent. When one of his two companions, Tom Burnett, returned that evening with a spare crampon, Thomas was gone and only his ice axe remained. So, from what I can gather here, the team, or at least Thomas while descending, had a fall the prior day on the 5th, which left him stuck on a precarious ledge. Though, because of the fall, he lost one of his crampons, which meant that he couldn't make it down the rest of the way to his teammates. Presumably, Thomas's two companions tried to help the situation, but eventually Tim had to go retrieve another crampon because Thomas had no way of getting down with only one. When Tim returned on the evening of the 6th, Thomas was missing and only his axe remained on the ledge. I'm sure that there are lots of complexities here that we can't fully appreciate from that description. What was the second companion doing during this time? Clearly he didn't stay with Thomas, so did he accompany Tim? That's not clear in the slightest. But again, we probably have to assume that there are complexities here that we can't fully understand. Reports seem to conflict and get weird at this stage, so let's have a look at some official press reports. 5 days after Thomas disappeared, the Dover Times reporter stated this. According to reports received here today from the climbers' base camp, 370 miles to the north, Thomas Mutch, leader of a 7-member American expedition scaling the 23,000-foot Mount Nun in the Himalayas, passed away while making an assault on the summit. Mutch's body was brought to the town of Kargil from the base camp at Tangui, following his passing on Tuesday, the United News of India reported. The domestic news agency gave no details of his passing, and his hometown in the United States was not immediately known. So we immediately have our first discrepancy. The American Alpine Club make no mention of Thomas ever being found, only that he had disappeared and that his ice axe was the only thing to remain. American press reports at the time of disappearance were mostly stating that his body was recovered and sent to Kargil. It's worthy of mention that newspapers in the US were reporting the same text basically word for word on the 11th and 12th. On October the 13th, Panama City News Herald brought some more information about Thomas to light. I quote, Thomas Mutch, an associated administrator of the US space program NASA, has passed away while leading a 7-member American expedition scaling the 23,000-foot Mount Nun in the Himalayas. The cause of his passing has not been disclosed. The article then repeats that Thomas's body was taken to Kargil, and all press reports are basically the same word for word on the 13th and 14th. On the 15th, press reports are still the same, only adding that details surrounding his passing are not known at this time. After some further digging, I found something absolutely weird, so let's get bizarre. I think it's probably best if I just read this press report out to you. On the 28th of October 1983, the Galveston Daily News reported this. New Delhi, India. Two Polish climbers found the frozen body of an American climber who disappeared 3 years ago near the summit of a Himalayan peak, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation said Thursday. Thomas Mutch, 49, suffered a head injury while climbing the 23,000-foot Nun Peak in India's Lak region. He vanished after his two companions went down to seek help. The foundation reported that the Polish climbers Boylan Agres and Pilak Jerzy found Mutch's body about 660 feet from the summit. His rucksack was still strapped to his shoulders, the climber said. The two were unable to bring Mutch's body down from the mountain, but took several photographs to identify the victim and the location. Mutch, a Brown University geology professor who was on leave to work for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was descending the mountain on October the 5th when he fell into a crevice. Two companions pulled him free, but he was unconscious and they left him in a makeshift shelter to go for help. When they returned, Mutch was gone and they theorised that he had regained consciousness, tried to climb down and fell a second time. What? What was happening with the press reports the 3 years prior who were stating that Thomas's body had been taken to Kargil? Was that simply not true, and if so, why in the world was that being lied about? Or had they found a body that they believed to belong to Thomas but wasn't actually him? This quite literally cannot be any other kind of mistake, because the difference between having a body and transporting it and not having a body at all is perhaps among the most easily distinguishable things that can ever happen. Reports never indicate what kind of search was organised for Thomas, but I think that we have to assume that there was some sort of effort, given that the authorities knew about it and it was being reported on by the press. This news report also makes it clear that the second companion also joined Tim in retrieving help. Given that Tim returned the same evening with a spare crampon, that could mean that the second companion made his way to civilization to notify the authorities and to get help. When Tim came back, Thomas was no longer there, and the only thing remaining was his ice axe, so where did he go? Again, I think we have to assume that there was some sort of search effort, which presumably would have been localised beneath the ledge that he was on. The question is, was he actually found then and there and transported to Kargil? Or was he missing for the next 3 years until his frozen remains were found by the Polish climbers? And if that is the case, then how did that even happen? And why was false information being reported? I actually find myself siding with the Galveston Daily News report because they cite the Indian Mountaineering Foundation who reported the discovery of the find, and I just don't see what motivation they could have had to report and lie about finding a missing person. The paper trail goes cold here as far as I can tell. What in the world happened to Thomas Mutch? Did he simply fall that day for a second time off the ledge, and if so, why couldn't he be located after that? Or was he located and transported to Kargil? Or was he literally missing for 3 years after that? Good actual lord, you're gonna have to leave your thoughts about this one. What even happened here? I'd just like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up, and if not, then give it a thumbs down. If there are any specific disappearances or an area in general that you'd like me to discuss, then feel free to leave a comment below. Other than that, I'd just like to say a big thank you to the patrons, and Merry Christmas, and I hope that you've had a great day or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.